Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point on this casual Friday. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk, the most feared and dangerous radio network in America, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Honored to have with us live and in our Focal Point studio, Rick Shaftan. He is a pollster and media consultant with Neighborhood Research / Mountaintop Media. Rick, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having me on the air.
So what is a New Jersey boy such as yourself doing down here at the birthplace of Elvis Presley?
Well, it's January. That's one thing. But also we're going to a meeting with some candidates. A lot of people are looking to run for Congress this year against incumbent Republicans who are selling out conservative principles. People are sick of hearing excuses about why we need to go along with what Obama is proposing with his agenda. They expect the Republicans they elected to Congress to fight what the president's doing rather than to roll out the red carpet. So I'm using this chance to meet with candidates. I like to get involved early, and hopefully they'll run, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and this is encouraging news, Rick, I think, to people in our listening audience, because we've been following the vote on this fiscal cliff, for instance. We've been following the vote on the Sandy relief bill. And we look at Speaker Boehner, and a majority of his own caucus voted against both of those boondoggle bills. One of them raised $620 billion in taxes. The other one spent money we just don't have and sent money up to Alaskan fisheries and supposed to be about the Sandy tropical storm. So you had a majority of Republicans in his own caucus voted against these things. And, there was a Hastert rule that if you don't have a majority of your own caucus, you don't bring it up to a vote. So I think what you're seeing there is a considerable degree of unrest even among House Republicans. And then you look at the Republicans that voted for both of those bills, and I would have to think, Rick, that they might be vulnerable to a primary challenge in their own party.
Absolutely, and they have a lot of explaining to do to their constituents because they were sent down there to cut spending and reduce the deficit, and they gave Obama this blank check with the fiscal cliff bill and essentially a blank check with the Sandy bill. So where's the restraint here? Why did we elect these guys?
Let me ask you this question. Our own congressman here, Alan Nunnally from the 1st District of Mississippi, voted against both of those bills, the fiscal cliff bill and the Sandy relief bill. He voted for the debt ceiling raise back in August of 2011. So he's tacking a little bit to the right in his own voting record. Do you think that perhaps Representative Nunnally and maybe others in the Republican Party are starting to hear from the base that they're deeply concerned about these fiscal issues, the debt ceiling, and maybe that message is penetrating?
Absolutely. And last year, 2012, Representative Nunnally had a primary, and he was attacked for some of his votes. And maybe he's looking at some of, even though he won, people who win one election doesn't mean they're going to win the next election. People are always looking at the next election. The thing is that too many of our representatives are more afraid of Obama and afraid of the Republican establishment than the people listening to this program. And that has to change. And once it does change, we're going to have government that represents conservative values. But as long as they don't take people who are conservative Christians and conservatives in general seriously and think, well, we can mollify them. We can say, well, we're better than the other candidate. We're not going to win. Our people really have to stand up. They have to write checks to candidates, and they have to get involved in primaries, especially because so many of these seats are safe seats now in general elections. But in primaries is where the election is.
Talking here with Rick Shaftan, who is a pollster and media consultant. And speaking of that, Rick, I got a couple of related questions. One is that looking ahead to 2014, the Democrats were making some noises about thinking they might be able to retake the House because of the divisions in the Republican Party. Do you think there's any realistic chance of that? I mean, it looks from my vantage point like the House is pretty securely in control of Republicans at this point. Do you see vulnerabilities there? And secondly, do the Republicans have any chance of taking control of the Senate? You've got these Senate Democrats. I mean, they're wigged out by this gun control stuff. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They want to get as far away from gun control because they represent states that have a pretty strong affiliation, allegiance to the Second Amendment. So what do you think the chances are of the Republicans losing control of the House in 2014 and taking control of the Senate in 2014?
Republicans shouldn't even have to worry about losing the House. Mitt Romney, as bad a candidate as he was, won, I think it was 225 House districts. That being said, the Republican Party has this ability to offend its base. Barack Obama went out of his way to make sure that his base, that every element of his base was happy with what he was doing. He endorsed gay marriage, endorsed gun control, endorsed every left-wing position. So whatever your left-wing issue is, if you're on that side of the fence, there was something about Barack Obama to like. On our side, our people, like, we can't, we don't want to be pro-gun. We don't want to be against homosexuals. We don't want to be like too close to the religious right. So they're so afraid of identifying with our people that our people wonder, why should we vote for them? So how could we lose the House? We did it in 2006.
So it could happen again. Well, and what explains this, Rick? I mean, why do you think the Republicans, they seem to listen more to the Washington Post and the New York Times and to be more afraid of what those pundits are going to say than they are concerned about their own constituents that elected them, sent them to office, and provided funds for their campaigns? What's going on with that?
Well, what happens, the people who advise candidates, the political consultants, people who do what I do, tend not to be religious people, and beyond that, tend to be contemptuous of religious people. So what you get is an attitude, well, we need these people but don't get too close, because you don't want to offend these alleged swing voters that really don't exist. Swing voters are people who, they're not political, and they go to where their friends go. If their friends are excited about a candidate because the candidate's saying something, those non-political people are going to lean towards that person. They tend to be conservative, but they're not political. They're not like us. They're not listening to this program. They're listening to something else right now. But they do listen to their friends, and if their friends are excited about a candidate, they're going to be influenced. But when our people aren't excited, when they don't want to admit they're supporting this person because he's embarrassing them every day, they go and vote personality.
Well, Rick, I've got a couple of stories in the stack here talking about Romney's loss in 2011, and essentially their arguments, and they're compelling to me and convincing to me that Governor Romney lost because the Republican base just did not turn out. Enough people stayed home that with perhaps a different candidate would have gone to the polls and taken their friends with them. Mm-hmm. And Obama's turnout was down from what it was in 2008, but Romney's was down enough that it couldn't make up the difference. So in other words, their analysis was that the Republicans did not offer the Republican base a candidate they could get excited about. How can we avoid making that mistake in 2016?
By having a candidate who appeals to the base.
So how do we get one like that?
Unfortunately, you have to, these are people we're talking about. We can't create this ideal candidate and just say we're going to run this person. We have to get a real person to actually do this. And what we need is somebody who's not afraid to go after the establishment candidate. I think with Rick Santorum, and I did some supportive work for Santorum in the campaign, but there was a lot of this, we don't want to go too hard on Mitt Romney because he'll probably be the candidate, and we don't want to hurt him in November. You can't have that approach. The Democrats don't operate like that. They shoot each other, and then in the general election, they shoot us.
Well, and it didn't seem like Governor Romney had any hesitation at
Right.
firing howitzers at his primary opponents, but then he wouldn't do it to Obama in the general.
Right.
So
because you see,
so if you don't return fire, I mean, your post is going to get obliterated.
It wasn't about electing Mitt Romney. It was about stopping a conservative from winning. That was what this was about. These are people who hate conservatives more than they want to defeat Democrats.
Now let's look ahead to 2016, and you're talking about, you're meeting with potential candidates and exploring the possibility of maybe primary runs, but looking to the presidential election 2016. Well, I guess even 2014, we're hearing a lot of stories about Karl Rove and his batch, the establishment Republicans, the Blue Bloods, the Country Club types, the Brooke Brothers types, that they are planning to get very aggressively involved in primaries next time around. They think they made a mistake by staying out of the primaries. Conservative candidates slipped onto the ballot that they would have liked to have taken out behind the barn and, tied to the rail, and yet they got in there. So that seems to me, if you have the establishment Republicans, you really sort of got two Republican parties. You got the citizen class Republicans, the base, people like you and me, and then you've got the ruling class Republicans like the Karl Roves and the Mitch McConnells and all that. And they're saying, hey, we're going to they typically have stayed out of the primaries, but they're saying this time we're getting involved in primaries. We're going to pick primary candidates. We're going to make sure they're establishment guys. We're going to make sure they've got money. So it seems like we've got our work cut out for us.
I'm glad they're doing it because then they'll identify exactly who these people are. They'll identify candidate X as being the establishment candidate. And I believe Republican primary voters are sick of the same old, that we have to sacrifice what we believe in because it's not going to win elections. There's twice as many conservatives in this country as liberals, and yet they get everything they want. Compromise to them is getting 110% of what they're asking for, and compromise for us is getting 10% of what we ask for, but really ending up with nothing.
Let me ask you one last question, Rick. We got about a minute left. The House Republicans have just met, strategized, talking about the debt ceiling. If they came to Rick Shaftan, you're a media consultant, you're a pollster, and they asked you what message they should bring to the American public starting tomorrow about the debt ceiling, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that it's obvious the president has no interest in negotiating or talking about reducing the debt or reducing spending. So you have to do this, the Republicans have to go home. They can't say, as they did last year, we're not going to let the government shut down. Because once you say you give up your bargaining position, then the other side has no reason to negotiate. You end up with this fiscal cliff debacle. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, we got that with John Cornyn today, just 30 seconds, Rick. We got that with John Cornyn. They say, hey, we're going to raise the debt ceiling. Seems to me you've just taken your whole card out and tossed it away.
This is what Republicans do best.
All right. Our guest has been Rick Shaftan, who's a pollster and media consultant, works with Neighborhood Research and Mountaintop Media. And Rick, maybe we'll have an opportunity to chat again. I understand you were at Judge Roy Moore's inauguration swearing-in ceremony.
That was a great ceremony because it was really in your face to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU. And we know they were there monitoring it, but there were scripture readings. It was just great. I mean, it was just, let's push the envelope and let them try to do something.
That's Judge Roy Moore, who's the Ten Commandments judge in Alabama, now the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. Our guest has been Rick Shaftan, pollster and media consultant. Rick, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having me on the air.
Focal Point After Talk, back in 2.